So I have to confess, I'm sitting up here on the front row, and I'm picturing my head, all of you behind me doing this and dancing around and all during the song. I don't know how you stayed seated during that. Thanks, guys, for a great special. And the youth also for the skit. Great to see you all here and participating with us and sharing that story. On January 31st, 2019, Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, appeared on the TV show The View to announce that he was forming an exploratory committee to perhaps run for president of the United States. Lainey was watching that show that day and began to tell me about this person that she'd never heard of before and how impressed she was with him as a person, with his background, with his ability to articulate important issues, and just was really captivated by him. She began to learn more about him and began to become more and more of a believer in Pete Buttigieg as a viable presidential candidate. And over those next 2 or 3 months, I began to listen to her and pay attention myself to what was going on around him and the excitement about him as a potential candidate. On April the 19th, 2019, Lainey and I went to South Bend, Indiana for his formal announcement for presidency, to run for president of the United States. And we had a chance to even volunteer. We got to volunteer because we offered to volunteer in order to go in outside of the freezing cold rain. So that was a real advantage to volunteering. But it was an exciting being there. And I think back to that time, I had never been that enthusiastic or passionate or involved in promoting one particular candidate. And regardless of what you personally think about Pete Buttigieg, I think the thing that captured me was Lainey's contagious belief about him as a candidate, as a different opportunity, as a new kind of politician. And that happens to us at times in lives where we encounter someone who's so believing and so contagious in their belief about a certain person or a certain subject that it rubs off. It captures our attention, and we begin to become more and more involved in perhaps even adopting that same belief. You know, whether it's belief in a political candidate or even the belief that's exhibited by a fictional character named Buddy the Elf when he believes in the spirit of Christmas and believing in the elves and believing in Santa and believing in family, all of those beliefs, that demonstration in that movie of that contagious belief is quite impactful. The reality is that what you believe affects others. It affects our family, it affects friends, it affects groups like this, our church. What we believe affects others. Think about how you grew up as a child and your parents' beliefs or friends' beliefs impacted you and affected the way you developed and the shape of your life. And that goes on even today. What we believe affects others. We see the greatest illustration of this in the world today. Every day, we see that what people believe about COVID affects other people's lives. It's been most disheartening to me to watch people time and time again choose self-interest over the interest of others, at the risk of offending some or many. I'm going to say that it's troubling that even Christians have touted publicly and stated their own right to their own life and their own body in disregarding perhaps the risk they might be making to other people. Family members who have infected others and resulting in deaths of other family members. Some it just happens, some you can't control. But some have been deliberately negligent in selecting their own interests. There's a passage of scripture that speaks to this that I want us to look at for just a second. It says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others." How much clearer can that be? How much more specific and focused could this apply to how we approach life, whether it's about COVID or other things? None of us is completely faithful to this imperative. I'm not, you're not. We fail in the area of putting ourselves in front of our family and the interests of others that we are responsible for and responsible to. We put ourselves and our own financial interests at times in front of those where we could make a difference perhaps in sharing and supporting other causes and other initiatives. We put our own interests in front of community responsibilities at times and just stay in our own little world and in our own little isolated space. We put our own self-interest at times in front of others in relationship to the church, trying to see what works for me and not so concerned about the interests of the others. What we believe affects others. Also, what you believe needs to work for you in the weeds of life. What I mean by this is that we have a big picture in our mind about certain beliefs. We believe in God. We believe in certain things about God. But does that work for us, what we believe in the weeds of daily living? You remember the pictures that are made up of thousands of little dots and things, the magic eye pictures, where you look at them and you're looking and looking, all of a sudden you see an image there kind of reveal itself. Well, we can see that big picture at times, but sometimes we lose that in the midst of those thousands of dots. We have a God of love, a God of goodness, and a God of grace. But there are times when those big picture views of God get distorted by things that we try to apply, certain philosophies or other things in life. We sometimes attempt to explain the unexplainable. A tragic loss, a tragic death, some horrible experience for a family, or just circumstances that don't pan out the way you expected. We throw phrases around to try to explain those, and I'm going to pick on one of those phrases this morning. It's this one right here. Everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. When you look at the definition of reason, it says that reason is a cause, explanation, or justification for an action or event. And I've heard people talk about someone who's lost someone in a tragic accident, a death of a child, a death of a spouse, family or friends, or other types of things that have happened, and they throw this phrase out, everything happens for a reason. Well, we just don't understand God's plan. Well, if we have a God of love and a God of grace and a God of goodness, how do we have a God who causes things to happen so that we might ultimately find something good about it, that we might ultimately be changed for the better because of it? In this broken and fragmented world, lots of stuff happens. Inconvenient stuff, bad stuff, tragedies. I really think that when people say everything happens for a reason, they're reaching to misapply a particular verse of Scripture that perhaps you're familiar with. Romans 8:28 says this: we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love God, who have been called according to God's purpose. This says that when stuff happens in life, in this broken world, when tragedy occurs, when heartache happens, God is not the cause, God is the answer. God is the salve. God is the comfort that brings grace and love and peace in the midst of that. The only explanation for some of the tragedies that happen and some of the things that occur in our world that are so devastating is that we live in a broken world. There is no better or other explanation. There is no cause other than the fact that we're a broken people in a broken world. If what we believe in the big picture, that God is a God of love and goodness and grace, then ascribing a tragedy or a devastating event to God just doesn't work. God is in the business of bringing wholeness, not creating and causing brokenness. If we understand that, what we believe affects others. Our beliefs work both in the big picture and in the weeds of life. If that's true, then our beliefs can be contagious. And if we're committed to bringing wholeness to a fragmented world, then we must ask ourselves this question: how can my beliefs become contagious? Mark Middleberg wrote a book called Contagious Faith. And in it, he talks about how in our daily lives, we can do certain things that share the love of God with others and the message of Christ with others. The first thing he describes is friendship building. It's not standing on a street corner talking about what God has done through Jesus Christ. It's building relationships, making friends to where your life would have an influence over another person through that friend relationship. Second, he talks about selfless serving, being that example in front of those friends and others of serving and being a part of something that is bigger than yourself, something that is focused on bringing wholeness to a fragmented world. Story sharing, talking to that friend and saying, I was really surprised last week when X happened in my life, and I prayed about this, and I got real comfort from God and felt God's peace in the midst of that circumstance. Just telling stories. Reason giving. Not everything happens for a reason, but actually sharing reasons that for why you're acting the way you are, reasons for why you're committed to First Christian Church of Louisville or committed to a certain family or a certain person or being a part of a certain cause. Sharing those reasons with others can influence and bring them to that contagious belief. And lastly, truth-telling. People have a way of knowing whether you're speaking truth or not. Not being rude and candid in that fashion, but just being truthful and honest and vulnerable and transparent. Truth-telling can lead to that contagious faith. Let's shift gears just a moment from the beliefs and what they do in affecting others. What you believe affects where you belong. We belong among other people, our families, our community, our church congregation and community of faith. We may belong among other people in this city as part of just the community of Louisville. We identify ourselves that way as Kentuckians, as Americans. We belong among other people. We also belong in social groups. Perhaps you're a member of a club or you have a small group, you're a book club. Somehow we create social groups to interact and share and have a sense of belonging ourselves. There are also those places that we feel like we belong, places of our own. A certain recliner or chair in a certain special room in your house that when you want to feel comforted and at home, that's what home feels like to you. You belong in that place. Have you ever felt like you didn't belong? I've shared before about my 7th grade year in school and what a difficult time in my life it was. My family had moved from north of Dallas closer into the city. I was attending a new school with new friends and just felt lost all that year, close to almost to the end of that 7th grade year. Many experiences of just sitting, feeling alone and not belonging in that class, in that experience, day after day after day, not feeling like I belonged. Also, in the business world, I've traveled all over the world, literally. Sometimes I've traveled alone and been in conferences to attend something or even to present. And I walk into the conference, and I'm a fairly gregarious person. But walking into a conference room with 600 people seated around tables of 10 and finding a spot, I found myself often just quiet, finding a seat and sitting there and not feeling like I belonged at all. I didn't belong to anybody in that room. I didn't belong in that place in the sense of feeling at home. So there are ways that we all experience that feeling of not belonging. I've quoted Brené Brown quite frequently, and here's another great statement from her about belonging. True belonging is not something you negotiate externally. It's what you carry in your heart. It's finding the sacredness in being a part of something. Well, talked about Buddy the Elf and the story Elf. The story begins with the fact that Buddy, as a person, as a baby, had been raised by elves, and he grew up thinking he was one of them, one of Santa's elves. grew up participating and sharing, even though he was big and clumsy and didn't fit all of the profile of the elves, until one day he overhears from a couple of the elves talking. We never told Buddy that he's human. He's human. Well, clearly he was stunned and immediately felt out of place and confused, and he strikes off for New York to find his dad and to find his family. Let's take a look at the video.
I don't belong anywhere.
Buddy! Buddy! Buddy, where are you?
Santa?
Mike, where you go? Mike! Santa!
Back off, Slick. Scare the deer. Buddy, is that you?
Are you okay?
Boy, am I glad to see you. The clausometer suddenly just dropped down to 0. There's just no Christmas spirit anymore. The strain was too much. The engine broke free of her mount. I need an elf's help.
I'm not an elf, Santa. I can't do anything right.
Buddy, you're more of an elf than anyone I ever met. And the only one who I would want working on my sleigh tonight.
Really?
Really? Will you fix it for me, buddy?
I'll try. Papa taught me how.
You gotta find it first. It dropped off the sleigh back over there a ways.
The engine.
The engine. Go, buddy. Go, Mr. Elf.
Hey! You found it.
Buddy!
I need to tell you something.
No, buddy, there's something I have to tell you right now. I didn't mean anything I said back there, not a word. I know you may be a little chemically imbalanced, but you've been right about a lot of things. I don't want you to leave. You're my son, and I love you. Buddy, what was it you wanted to tell me? Oh, right. Come with me. Right. Come on.
Great movie, but even as an adult watching Buddy say the first line that was in that clip, I don't belong anywhere, resonates. Belonging has to do with what we believe. He believed he was an elf, and then he knew he wasn't. And where did he belong? Well, eventually he learns that the elves still consider him one of them. And so he belongs with them, and he belongs with his human family as well. Brene Brown talked about the sacredness in being a part of something. Wouldn't it be incredible to belong in a way that changes everything? That's what God has provided us through Jesus Christ. Galatians chapter 4, because you are his children, God sent the Spirit of God, Son, into our hearts, the Spirit who calls out, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but God's child. God has made you an heir. Now, adoption in the New Testament times, was rather interesting. The Jewish people in particular were passionate about having an heir. And if they didn't have children, particularly a male child, they could adopt a male adolescent or even an adult, and who was perhaps, maybe there was a prisoner in jail or someone that didn't have another family any longer. They could adopt that person, and they became part of that family. All traces of that person's past life were erased. They became a child of that family. And not only a child, an heir to that family. Adoption in New Testament times was a belonging that changed everything. Well, that's what Paul says in Galatians chapter 4. When God brings us into God's family and makes us God's children, to the place where we're able to call him Daddy, Abba, Father. Not only are we a part of that family, not only do we belong because we believe, not only do we belong because we believe in God, but God's love, God's grace, God's invitation through Jesus Christ, we belong because we're an heir of what God offers through Jesus Christ. Belonging changes everything. It changes how you affect others. It gives you a faith belief that works in the big picture and in the weeds of life. It makes having a contagious faith possible even for you and me. Amen.